All right, welcome everybody to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by Superbook Sports. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn, at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I'm excited to bring to you a guest for the first time on this podcast, on this channel, as we have moved into the YouTube space. I've got a really exciting week during Rivals Week, and I couldn't think of any other person I'd rather have to help break down the Philadelphia 76ers, everything that they are going through right now. They've had a lot of eventful times. We're just speaking right before this pod about the Eagles, and I'll be rooting for the 49ers because they have Christian McCaffrey, who I played with, but that I feel like that's a fair reason. And also just to watch Philly burn would be pretty hilarious. He is Bryan Toporek at Toporek on Twitter, does a lot of great work for Forbes, and is just a great Philly fan in general. So Bryan, I want to give the floor to you. I know that this week is one of the most intense sports weeks that Philly has probably had as a city in a while.
It is. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on Rivals Week. I'm glad we can keep the theme going from the NBA to this podcast as well. So happy to be here. Coming off of the Ben Simmons versus Joel Embiid first game ever last night, and then we have obviously this potential MVP showdown on Saturday. And I would disagree that is a reason to root for the Niners on Sunday, but we'll take that offline.
That's okay. No, I actually played with Christian at Valor Christian High School. That's where we both went to high school, and so that was I know him personally, and that was pretty cool to just watch him be traded to a place that actually could use his talents well. So that's a great thing, and hopefully for your guys' sake they don't use it too well on Sunday.
Right.
That'd be pretty tough. But either way, Wednesday was an interesting day for both of us. I got to deal with the load management questions for the Nuggets and Jokic and Murray, and you got to deal with Simmons versus Embiid. And I know that you guys have been really super just rearing for that matchup, and it hadn't happened a couple times before just because of various injuries. But this time it did manage to happen, though without Kevin Durant. Were you surprised that the game was as close as it was?
Not really, because I mean, earlier in the season, the Nets played the Sixers, and the Sixers didn't have Harden, Embiid, and Maxey, and the Sixers somehow still won that game. So weird stuff happens when these two teams play. But Doc Rivers spoke after the game about how he felt the Sixers caught up emotionally, and there's good emotions to have during a game, and then if you get too wrapped up in it, we veer into the bad side. And I think Embiid in particular was the big culprit in that regard. I think, he wanted to dunk Ben Simmons into the center of the earth. He came out, especially because he knew there were going to be possessions where Simmons switched onto him, or there was one point in the game where Simmons was acting as the 5. So he knew he was going to have some one-on-one opportunities. And, of course, the Nets sent help at times, but he was looking to make a statement. And I think the whole team was. George Niang was throwing hard elbows in the Ben's side. There is definitely bad blood between those two guys. So I thought that was, certainly factored in. Also, they just decided to not guard Seth Curry, which was certainly a decision. But, I think, again, it's how these teams match up in a 7-game series down the line. We learned nothing about that from either matchup so far this season. They'll play again in a couple weeks. Hopefully KD is back by then, and we can, finally see these two teams take each other on at full strength.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup because we've seen what KD really does to impact that kind of matchup. I know that it's you can't really take anything from it in terms of okay, who's going to win this matchup in the playoffs? Because I think KD's just one of those guys that he will change the entire complexion of the game, as would Simmons, Embiid, Maxey, or not Simmons, Harden, Embiid, Maxey. Excuse me. On the other side, when they missed the first matchup, so it's definitely something to watch out for, and I'm curious to see how that sort of evolves. I thought that Nick Claxton, he's got this active. So I have an investment in Nick Claxton now because he has this active streak going of 50+% from the field in every single game that he's played so far this year. and he's just outpacing Nikola Jokic by a couple of games, which is crazy, by the way, because I looked up the stat. Claxton takes like 70% of his shots from 0 to 3 feet, and Jokic takes like 30% of them from 0 to 3 feet. It doesn't dunk at all. So that's always a fun thing to track when you're looking at floaters and threes and things like that. But no, I think that the way that he guarded Embiid was interesting. The way that Simmons guarded Embiid was pretty interesting. And you're right that Embiid, when he locks in and kind of calms down a little bit, will probably put those guys in the woodshed. But that's the matchup that they have to dominate if they're going to win that series. And if he doesn't dominate that matchup, it just would not surprise me if the Nets surprised Philly later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like they've just been spamming Harden Embiid pick and rolls a lot lately, and that's become their bread and butter. And we really didn't see that a ton last night. Like Embiid was back to being more of a post-up guy, which maybe it was the Hakeem Olajuwon criticism from the other day, or again, maybe it was just like he really, Ben's smaller than him. I'm sure they went at each other in practice back when they were both in Philly, so like he's very familiar with that matchup. But
can we talk about the Hakeem thing real quick?
Yeah,
I thought it was more of just a stylistic thing rather than just a like, hey, this is how impactful and effective you are. I thought that Hakeem was just looking for trying to generate the easiest move possible at the basket rather than like because Embiid does have the followaways and like he's so good at that and has a lot of opportunities where he can get a shot off, but he looks more like Kobe doing it than he does Hakeem. I honestly thought it was more like that than it was like, hey, you are a worse player because of this. That's just not really how I took it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Embiid is especially sensitive to this criticism just because, how many times has he heard it from Shaq and Barkley in particular on inside? Like, you're a big man, go post up. Why are you shooting all these jumpers? And it's like, well, because he's really good at hitting those jumpers. He's like above 50% from the field and hitting those. So, I think it's him just saying, like, look, the game is different now. I used to be this. I used to post up every time and guys would double me and I can't see where they're coming from. So I added this, like it was a big change for him to add this face up game. And now like he can be more of a threat in transition as well. Now he made a concerted effort to add this to his game. So I think he gets frustrated when all these older players are like, well, just abandon everything you've worked on for the past couple of years. He's like, no, I made a deliberate effort because I've been in the playoffs and I used to play this way and it didn't work. And now I rounded out my game and it made me into what I am, like that, one of the league's leading scorers, a legitimate MVP candidate for 3 straight years. Like, I think it's, a good thing that he's done this, but every time he hears that type of criticism, he gets a little frustrated by like, you guys just don't know how the game is played these days.
Yeah, it's definitely like he'll get to the rim. He will draw fouls. Like he will do that stuff, especially when it matters. And that's the most important thing. It's not going like he's not always going to go to the fadeaway in the playoffs. It's a thing that you're working on right now, so that when he has to go to it, then he can. So that's how I took it. And so Hakeem, Shaq, whatever, like it was something that Nuggets fans could definitely hold over their heads. That's pretty funny.
Right.
But does it have any bearing? No. Absolutely not. Okay, let's move on to the Sixers just in general. I'm curious as to what you're thinking. Was this season sort of what you envisioned with the Sixers, and are you happy with the results so far?
That is a loaded question for Sixers fans because there's been this weird we're more than halfway through the season and it feels like a lot of Sixers fans are still just waiting for the other shoe to drop. They got off to a rocky start, a large part because of injuries. I believe they were 12-12, and then they've just ripped off this like massive. I guess they're now 19-4 over their last 23. So everything over the past 2 months is screaming like, "Hey, this is a legitimately good team." Like that, they're not blowing out teams every game. A lot of these wins have been close. At Utah and the Lakers last weekend, both were 1-point wins. So maybe that is a sign for some skepticism. I think the interesting thing lately is, Doc Rivers said that they were going to have 3 starting lineups moving forward. So one would be what they began with opening night: Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, Joel Embiid.
Right.
With Maxey hurt, and Harden hurt, DeAnthony Melton moved into the starting lineup for a good chunk of the season. So the other one is what we've seen in recent games, which is Melton in place of Maxey off the bench as a 6-man. He didn't say what the third one was. I'm assuming it would just be the 3 guards, Tobias and Embiid, but we have yet to see that at least start a game. It seems like they've just kind of pivoted to, we said we have 3, but we're really just going to do the Melton Harden thing. And I think I've been really impressed with how Tyrese Maxey has handled it, because there aren't many third-year guards who, were breakout stars last year, were even better this year, get hurt, lose their starting spot. He's up for an extension after this year. Like, he's eligible for a 9-figure contract and is likely going to get a 9-figure contract.
He will.
Yeah. I think a lot of guys would probably bristle at the idea of coming off the bench, but he really does seem to have bought into that role. And we saw last night, he was phenomenal in that. Like, he is actually salvaging Doc Rivers' decision to go with all bench lineups oftentimes. So that's, I think, the biggest thing to track over the next couple months is, do they stick with Melton in the starting lineup in place of Maxey? How does Maxey handle that? Can he really find a groove as a 6th man? And then PJ Tucker, I think, is the other big question mark.
Right.
Very much has not found his rhythm offensively yet. You're not expecting him to be like a 15, 20 point per game scorer, but he's got to knock in the occasional 3-pointer, like get some offensive rebounds, get a putback here or there, hit a couple free throws, just give you something on offense. And there have been a lot of games where he's, just total goose egg. So if they can figure out ways to make him more effective, I think those are the 2 big storylines for the Sixers over the next couple months.
Yeah, the turnaround that they've had in general has been awesome. Like, going from where they were, obviously, I have as somebody with a vested interest in their downfall, I was not super happy about it. But
right,
it was definitely a good thing for Sixers fans after what was a really shaky start to see it on both sides of the floor. And you knew that Embiid and Harden could generate a top 10 offense basically in their sleep. The defense, I think, was the question. And it seems like DeAnthony Melton, just in particular, has been such an impactful player on that end, just being the point of attack defender, blowing up every screen and action that teams are trying to run. What has he meant to the Sixers so far this year? And would he be somebody that maybe even plays more than Maxey in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't totally shock me, just because the concern with a Maxey Harden front backcourt is the defense, obviously. And if you are giving opponents 2 guys that they can target relentlessly on pick and rolls, you just wonder how far you can go. Melton has been so good on that end of the floor. He's really just like this 2-way connective tissue, similar to what Bruce Brown has been in Denver, where you just need those kind of glue guy types around your superstars. Like,
Right.
that, your offense is going to revolve around Embiid and Harden, at least with the starting lineup. And, Maxey was still averaging like 20 points a game alongside those 2 guys. So he was finding his way regardless. But now if you can have him anchoring these bench units instead, it helps kind of spread out the offense, and, he can get his while those 2 guys are resting. Whereas Melton, I mean, I don't know exactly what he's shooting after last night, but he's been in the high 30s. Yeah, 39.3% on threes, almost 6 attempts per game. I mean, averaging almost 2 steals a game. Like, he's just been a phenomenal addition. I think the Sixers have no regrets. They traded Danny Green and the pick that became David Roddy to Memphis for him last summer. Frankly, that could turn out to be a win-win trade, because we just heard that Danny Green's coming back February 1st. He's targeting for his season debut of torn ACL, which is wild. But, I mean, he's a potential trade chip for Memphis at the deadline too. So, like, wouldn't shock me at all if both teams have 0 regrets about how that deal went down.
I love Melton. I've loved him for the last couple of years. I thought that he would have been a great fit in Denver next to Murray. I'm glad they got KCP. I'm glad that because that's worked out phenomenally for Denver, and I think Bruce Brown has also worked out phenomenally in Denver. We'll talk about those guys in the second segment, but in general, Eastern Conference, like the playoff picture is shaping up to be what it is. Boston looks like they're probably going to finish at the top, but Philly continues to push upward and may end up as the 2 seed in the playoffs. When you're thinking about who can actually win the Eastern Conference right now, who does it start with and who does it end with?
I think it obviously starts with Boston. They have the best record in the league. They look phenomenal.
They're only 1 game ahead of Denver, by the way.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
They're like, pretty good.
Yep. I think Boston definitely. I mean, it pains me to say it either way, Boston or Denver. But I mean, there are just no obvious weaknesses with Boston. Their defense is phenomenal. They're just they're so versatile in what they can throw out, which is annoying for teams hoping to face them and topple them in the playoffs. But they can shapeshift their roster. I mean, if you want to go small, they have that option. If you can do the double bigs with Horford and Rob Williams, and Brogdon was a really, really good pickup for them. Derek White's great. Tatum is playing. Tatum's like in any other year, if Jokic and Luka and Embiid didn't exist, would be the front runner for MVP right now. And like, he might not even start in the All-Star game. We'll find out tonight, but he's having a career year. Jaylen Brown's having a career year. So I think Boston, assuming they get to the playoffs fully healthy, the clear favorite to win the East. I think Philly, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, assuming health for all 3, which is, a big assumption, frankly.
Sure.
Because Embiid and Harden have certainly had their issues over the years. Milwaukee, like Chris Middleton, has barely played this year. KD and Kyrie and even Ben Simmons have certainly had their issues as well. But I think all 3 at least have the upside if things break right. It's hard to imagine any of them toppling Boston, but Milwaukee came pretty close last year, and that was without Middleton. So if he's healthy, we know Giannis, like, he still might be the one player you pick if you're picking anyone in the playoffs to have on your team. I know he's had somewhat a down year in terms of efficiency, but I think it's because he's had to carry such a load without Middleton. Drew Holiday has been playing really well this year. They get Joe Ingles back recently. I know Bobby Portis is now out. So they just feel like, let's just get to the playoffs in one piece and see what happens there. Brooklyn, I'm scared to bet against Kevin Durant if he's fully healthy. And, as much as I think Kyrie Irving off the court is just a very problematic individual, there is no denying on the court, he is still one of the most effective scorers in the NBA. You mentioned Claxton. He's having a monster season. He is really leveling up in real time. I think Ben Simmons is really the big question for them. Like, the version that came out in the third quarter last night is what they need. The version that was invisible in the first half very much is not. And I know Jacques Vaughn called him out after the game, which I'm sure will go well.
Sure, that would be great.
Yeah. Cleveland's the one that I'm on the fence about because Garland and Mitchell are so good together. Mitchell has just been such a perfect fit for that team. I know, like, it's easy to say they need a small forward, but they really do need a small forward, and I don't know how they're going to – they've got Karis LeVert's expiring contract to dangle, but they traded so many picks and assets to get Mitchell, so it feels like that is probably going to push them down beyond the, like, legitimate, I think they can win the East this season tier, but wouldn't shock me. One of these teams is going to finish outside the top 4. So, like, Cleveland is very likely to face one of Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, Brooklyn in the first round. Would not shock me if Cleveland won a series or even 2 series. It's just, can you beat 3 of these top 4 teams? It's possible, but I'm not quite there with them.
Yeah, the East is tough, man. Like that, I think that's really flipped over the course of this last calendar year or two. Like, it has definitely shifted, I think, to where the certainty at the top is just not what it was in the West. And now there's certainty in the East where you can count on all of those teams to at least put up a really strong fight. Whether they'll ultimately raise the finals trophy at the end of it or not, I don't really know. But I could see all of those teams going. Probably not Cleveland, because like you said, I don't think that they are as connected between the two guards and the two bigs as they probably need to be. Their bench still leaves a lot to be desired, but always having a guy like Garland or Mitchell on the court is going to really help their offense this time around, as long as those guys are playing at a super high level. I gotta tell you, I watched Milwaukee last night and was not impressed. Maybe it was because they didn't see Jokic and Murray and weren't really fully like on point with everything that they wanted to do. I think they thought that Denver would just roll over, and Denver didn't really roll over. It was 107-99, and they turned the ball over 23 times, and they tried to run through the brick wall that Denver tried to put up there with Aaron Gordon and Jeff Green and Zeke Naji and guys like that, and they couldn't really do it. And I'm kind of surprised by that when you have Giannis. And yes, he did get to the free throw line 22 times, but it was after he turned the ball over 9 times. And I just think that if Denver ran up against them, Denver would be pretty happy. I think if Philly ran up against Milwaukee, I think Philly would be pretty happy too. There's some things that, going up against Brook Lopez and Giannis is probably not a super awesome treat for Joel Embiid, but he could get through it. He could definitely get through it, and there's enough that he could do.
Frankly, I think that's, if I had to pick a matchup in the second round of the top 4, I would probably pick Milwaukee instead of Boston or Brooklyn, which sounds crazy to say.
No, it doesn't, because look, the way that Boston and Brooklyn space you out and they remove the need for a rim protector like Embiid, you need to be switchable and versatile against those teams. And I think Denver this year is a little bit more switchable and versatile, that they could match up with a team like Boston or Brooklyn at least a little bit better than they could last year. But it's still something where you're going to have Jokic on the court. And I know that Embiid's a much better defender just on the perimeter than somebody like Jokic is from a switching perspective. But even Embiid is going to struggle with that, because it's 6'7" Jaylen Brown and 6'8" Jason Tatum, and switching on to guards and closing out to the corner. And that's hard. That's just hard for a big person to do.
Yeah. I mean, we saw it last night when he would try to switch out to Seth Curry. Nick Claxton is a very good roller. So he would switch out to Curry, and then Embiid has to, go either, you can't leave Curry wide open, which they did at times. So he goes out to Curry, but then Claxton's rolling the rim, and you've got a much smaller guy on Claxton. So yeah, then they're well designed. And I think Jacques Vaughn has at least showed he's willing to just sit Ben Simmons. Like, Ben Simmons is no longer the all-star certainty that he was back in Philly, where it's like you felt like you had to pander to him. Now he's just like, all right, if we get good Ben Simmons, we'll play him. But if not, like, you're going to sit for the entire fourth quarter, and we don't care.
It's going to be interesting. I'm fascinated to see how I'm fascinated to see how the Sixers work out in the East, and whether they can kind of break through this time around. If you had to predict it, do you think that they get through?
No.
It's easiest to predict no, by the way. And I've been doing it with Nuggets fans too. Like, look, I know that Denver's the favorite right now. I would still bet against Denver versus the field. Like, that's just how it works.
Right. Yeah. And I think the Sixers are limited in what they can do at the trade deadline. So I don't think they're going to be making any major upgrades. I don't know that any of the other contenders are. So maybe we're just rolling it out as is. But Boston in particular, we'll see. They play the night before the trade deadline, and I'm hoping that Boston just so thoroughly drills Montrezl Harrell, or it's the Sixers in the Montrezl Harrell minutes. Daryl Morey's like, all right, we have to upgrade at this spot. Fine. But I think that is a major concern. I wrote about it recently in Forbes. I sound like a broken record, but they just get crushed at times when Embiid is off the floor. Montrez is who he is. Good offensive player, zero rim protection, not a good pick and roll defender. We know Doc has overplayed him in the playoffs. Denver fans in particular are very familiar with Montrezl Harrell and Doc Rivers. So, all of us, I think that is in part why Sixers fans are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's like Montrez has overtaken Paul Reed as the primary backup center. And we're all like, how this story ends, right? We've seen it before. surely we're not going to do this again. But no, we're 3 months from the playoffs, and that's where it stands right now.
Well, we will see what happens there, but for now, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to discuss the Nuggets side of things, but first, gonna pay some bills here. Gonna talk about our friends over at Superbook Sports, as the final drive for the championship is here, and there's no better place to wager on this football title till this weekend than Superbook Sports. Superbook features the best menu of prop bets in the business. Plus, check out their special odds boosts and promotions at superbook.com. With over 3 decades of odds-making experience in Las Vegas, there's no better place to wager than Superbook Sports. Win some money as one lucky team wins the championship. Download the Superbook Sports app now. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. We'll be right back with Pickaxe and Roll. And we're back. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Joined by my good friend, Bryan Toporek, who does work for Forbes, but also is over at Liberty Ballers doing some writing for SB Nation. Shout out to SB Nation, as that has really gone asunder over this last week, unfortunately. It hurts me for sure, because Denver Stiffs was where I spent my first 7 years writing. And so it's brutal to see all of that happen. But you mentioned the NBA pod with Morton Jensen. That's like, you guys do great work over there. I've been a guest on that pod before, and I think that you guys do a great job of covering the league at large. And it's one of the reasons why I want to have you on to talk about just the NBA, but also the Nuggets specifically, because I know that you guys pay attention, and I know that we're going to get like really good takes from this. So, Bryan, I'll give you the floor. Before we get there, Jokic and Murray sat out this last game on Wednesday night. It was unfortunate. I think it drew some ire from Nuggets, or from NBA fans in general, that wanted to see Giannis and Jokic, despite the fact that, hey, by the way, the Sixers and the Nets were on, and that's the only game that was promoted for today or for yesterday. So look, Jokic and Murray. Jokic is actually dealing with a hamstring thing right now. Like, that, it's very rare that he actually deals with an injury, and this is something that Nuggets fans are trying to get used to. But they sat him on this back-to-back after playing 36 minutes, coming back from the injury against the New Orleans Pelicans. You, on this side of things, you're not surprised about stuff like this, right? Like, a second night of a back-to-back, you've got an MVP candidate. It's a soft tissue injury. Like, what are we doing here? It's fine to sit the guy on the second night of a back-to-back. It's just unfortunate that it was Giannis and the Bucks.
Yeah. I mean, with all of this debate about load management and how the league can manage it, it's like, I cover the NBA. I'm a huge NBA fan. I would not pay, months in advance to buy tickets to an NBA game right now. Like, I would pay day of once I see the injury report, but I would not be interested in like risking it. And especially, like, you do have to check the schedule. It's like, I've had friends, reach out to me like, hey, should I buy tickets to this game 2 months from now? And like, my first instinct is like, oh, let me see if it's a back-to-back. Let me see if it's a 3 and 4 nights type thing. Yeah. So I don't know. I know a lot of people are saying like, they've got to fix this. They are discussing a new CBA, so maybe they extend the season by a week or two and, fully eliminate back-to-backs or something like that. I don't think there's a perfect solution here, because as you mentioned, if Jokic is really dealing with something, like, sports science has just evolved beyond what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And we have technology that now like really thoroughly tracks, hey, this guy is at risk for an overuse injury that they just did not have back then. And I think it's smart to be proactive. Maybe should they have sat him against New Orleans and played him against Milwaukee? I don't know.
The answer is no, by the way. Like, if you're trying to win a conference, if you're trying to, like, you're going to focus on the conference game versus the non-conference game. And you're going to want to get the winnable game where you're not playing Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram against the CJ McCollum-led New Orleans Pelicans, and you got to get that game. You've got to ensure that you win that one. So should they have split up Jokic and Murray? Maybe. But, like, I don't know. Like, I can totally understand why they went for that one to try to get it and then sat everybody in Milwaukee and just punted.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's a fair point, and I don't think there's a solution here. Because I think, even if you fully eliminate back to backs, I think still guys are still gonna load manage at times, and this is what we get for like rings culture. If everything is like decided, if the meaning of your season is only decided by the playoffs and what happens in the playoffs, then of course you're going to prioritize getting to the playoffs as healthy as possible, even if
Right.
it comes at the expense of a regular season loss.
Yeah, the Nuggets have obviously they haven't prioritized the regular season these last 2 years, but with Jokic going for MVPs in a couple of those, and honestly, like they had to scrap and claw to get a 6 seed this last year in order to stay out of the play and just eliminate that possibility. Now, should they have scrapped and clawed that hard when they could have faced the Memphis Grizzlies in the first round of the playoffs as opposed to the Golden State Warriors? Maybe it's a little bit of a different conversation that we're having. But look, Sixers fans know exactly how often Jokic wants to play, how available he is, and then like I'm sure that availability word is kind of a trigger word in terms of Sixers Nation. So apologies for that, but look, Murray's coming off of a torn ACL. Like there's the other side of this where that is a perfectly legitimate reason to injury manage. Like he played 40 minutes the previous night. Like what are you going to do?
Yeah, I don't think there's a good answer. I think teams are right to be smart and be proactive. And if it comes at the expense, I think if anything, just being more transparent would be helpful. Like if that guys are going to sit, post it a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance. But I don't think teams are planning that far ahead. I think if, like they blew out the Pelicans and Jokic played 25 minutes and Murray, got to sit for the entire fourth quarter, maybe he does play against Milwaukee. It's just like there's no good, perfect solution here, I think.
Yeah, that's the key. That's the key right there. So, look, it is what it is. We're not going to belabor the point, but I think Denver will be well rested for Saturday, which we'll talk about that in the third segment. But next, I just kind of want your general opinion on where the Nuggets are as a team, what they're looking like right now. Denver at this point, they're fourth in net rating, and Philly's fifth at 4.2 and 4.1 respectively on NBA.com. They're pretty comparable teams in terms of quality right now. Denver's up to 14th in defensive rating, which I don't know if people really are paying attention, but this last couple of months, when they started trying on defense, they have actually been really good. And I'm curious to see whether, like, you think is 14th good enough? Like, what's the threshold here to really consider them a championship caliber team?
Well, I think the benefit of playing in the West is that there isn't a Boston out there. Like, there's not a team that is so far ahead of the field that you're scared of. Like, oh yeah, this team's definitely just going to make the finals. The upside of the Warriors or of the Suns if they can get fully healthy, or of the Clippers, but I don't think the Nuggets have to be afraid of anyone in the West, and I don't think they are. I think KCP was an awesome addition to this team, especially since Will Barton just looks like dust. You just got out at the perfect time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, kudos. Yeah.
We're really, really sad about that in general, but like, look, it's a thing. Like, I think, sorry, as the air starts going on in my apartment.
Oh, good.
Great. It's going to be one of those things with Denver where they got killed for that trade in the offseason because
did they?
Or like half and half. Some of it was like, okay, they got about equivalent value, but a lot of people thought that they did it for salary reasons, or at least that was the first reaction. Because I think a lot of people considered KCP and Will Barton on the same level, and then they also gave up Monte Morris for Ish Smith. So, look, I understand that take, but Will is now not playing for Washington, and Monte, we saw his limitations against the Golden State Warriors, and you're not going to have that with KCP.
Yeah, it felt like a bet on Bones Highland taking a bigger role. Like they knew Murray was coming back, so Monte was going to shift into his backup role, where I would argue he's like overqualified to be a backup point guard, but underqualified to be a starting point guard. He's in that weird middle tier, but like
right.
as a backup, he's one of the best in the league. But the upgrade from Will Barton to KCP, KCP was. I loved the trade from Denver. Like, I was so mad with every move Denver made this offseason. So I was like, God, that's perfect. And like Bruce Brown, you mentioned D'Anthony Melton as being like one of these analytics darlings, or like guys that only really like hardcore NBA fans know is better than whatever his modest scoring totals would suggest. Bruce Brown, 100% in that mold too. And as soon as they signed him, and I was like, how did the league let this happen? Like, how did you let this guy go for the taxpayer mid-level to Denver of all places? What are we doing here? Like, he was so good in Brooklyn, so versatile. It was just clear that he was going to be a great fit next to Jokic. And I think, the combination of KCP, Gordon, Bruce Brown helps explain why their defense has taken the leap that it has, even though, I know I do want to ask you two questions about the Nuggets.
Sure.
Because one, I was looking at this the other day and saw Jokic is like leading the league in defensive box plus minus, I believe.
Great. Yes. I hate that, by the way. Like,
okay.
Honestly, like it oversells how good he is, and completely like it completely ruins the quality of the metric in general,
Right.
just based off of that. Like, I think that this season in particular, Jokic has not been that great defensively. He's been, I would call it an average defensive player, just average, where he's not horrible. And there's a lot of things that he does protecting the rim and protecting guys from getting all the way to the rim, which is honestly the most important thing when it comes to rim protection. I know that what you can limit the number of attempts that teams take, and that's part of it. You can limit the efficiency that a team has when they go for it. The best rim protectors do both, and I think that a guy like Jaren Jackson doesn't really limit the number of attempts at the rim, but he blocks everything in sight and definitely makes it impossible for teams to score around there. Jokic limits the number of attempts, but teams, when they do actually end up getting their score pretty consistently, he has been good in terms of the drop coverage that Denver's played. And they've actually been way better at that this year, with more effective defenders, guys that can actually get around screens. And also the length of Michael Porter Jr. has really, I think, bolstered what their defense actually is. They have one of the better defensive lineups with their starting lineup. Like, I know it doesn't feel that way a lot of times. And when you look at Jokic giving up some shots at the rim, that definitely doesn't feel that way. But they rebound everything, and Jokic is a part of that. And they also get turnovers and force turnovers every now and then. And they also don't foul. That's probably the biggest – that's what's one of the bigger reasons too. But they've contested everything with him on the court, and they've just looked better doing it over the course of these last couple of months. The first couple of months it was not good. And this last game, I think you could see the lack of mobility with the hamstring injury really impacting him. But Jokic is not going to win any defensive awards, nor should he, but he doesn't have to. And I think everybody that says you need an elite defensive center or at least like a switchable defense in order to win a title, it maybe, like, we're going to find out, because Denver's offense is so freaking good that you have to stop that too. Yeah,
I mean, the Nuggets, like, all 7 of their top rotation players are shooting above 37.5 from 3. Like, there's not a single weak link offensively. My other question for Denver, because I am intimately familiar with this player, unfortunately, is how are you enjoying the DeAndre Jordan experience? Because Matt Moore of the Action Network, I know, is a Denver guy, goes to a lot of games, so I follow him and have seen him, I don't want to say caping for DeAndre Jordan, but at least saying like, hey, it's not as terrible as his reputation suggests. But
so it's funny. Matt is definitely veteran heavy. He's veteran centric, where he's trying to defend these guys and not just like give the reins over to a young player that hasn't really earned it yet. And I understand that mentality. Matt and I are friends. We sit at the game and talk about it all the time. That I think that what Denver really needed is what DeAndre's providing, and that's veteran presence, somebody who is communicating really well, both on and off the floor. and is at least getting them to a place where the championship level habits are good. Like I think DeAndre knows what to do in a lot of these cases, and he also knows how to be a vocal leader in general, which is something that Denver has lacked, especially when Murray went out with the ACL tear. His voice was kind of taken away from what they needed. And as he's kind of worked his way back, he started using his voice a little bit more, getting a little bit more comfortable with that. But Jokic was never going to be that guy, and Murray wasn't that guy, and Porter isn't that guy, and Gordon's not really that guy. And so, like, you're trying to come up with guys who can really tie the room together. And I think DeAndre has done that really well, if I'm being honest. On the court, the net rating stuff is horrible. Like, I think that Zeke has really improved the defense, and he's also just in general a better offensive threat because he could space the floor a little bit and is also rebounding well and doing a lot of things. And he's grown a little bit on that end, but he's kind of our Paul Reed, where you have a young player that you can see is talented, that you can see can help you out in the playoffs based off of their skill set, and the veteran is playing over them at times, and you're just scratching your head like, we know how this ends. Why are you doing it? Well, for Denver, that was mostly in October, November, December, and now that January's hit, it's mostly been Zeke behind Nikola, and Denver's been really good because of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the only one with this conspiracy theory, but the conspiracy theory that they signed DeAndre Jordan just to boost Jokic's net rating for that third straight MVP seems to be coming true so far. But
it's well on its way. But what I will say is that Denver, like this last game that they played healthy, where they faced off against New Orleans, Jokic had a minus, and I don't think it was all his faults, and it was the bench that really helped boost them through. And it was a lineup that featured Zeke at center with Jamal staggering with the second unit, and you had Jamal, Christian Brown, Vlatko Chanchar, Jeff Green, and Zeke Naji. That was quite an interesting group. It's pretty big in general. Yeah. So it's really interesting, and Denver's kind of messing around with different things right now with their second unit, trying to figure it out. But I think Jamal captaining that second unit with Zeke Naji at center instead of DeAndre has been helpful for the bench.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got a player in Zeke. I've been impressed with Brown as well. So I have very few concerns about Denver overall. I think I'd be pretty surprised at this point if they didn't finish as the top seed in the West. Yeah, the problem is, look at some of the teams in the play-in mix right now, and like if your reward for finishing as the number one seed, maybe playing a fully healthy Phoenix team or a Warriors team that's the defending champion, and like maybe they trade Wiseman for an Alex Caruso or something. That's a rough draw for a one seed. I'll say that much.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I'm curious as to your the Western Conference teams that you actually believe have a chance to win the title. What would that order look like? Is Denver at the top of that?
Oh, man. I mean, probably. It's so hard to doubt the Warriors because we just saw it happen last year. Yeah. But, it's for the NFL fans out there, it's like similar to Tom Brady and the Bucs. Like the Bucs were just so mediocre all year, and then like have this one game where their offense finally clicks, and everyone's like, oh, they're going to turn it on in the playoffs. And then the playoffs come, they get destroyed.
They were still mediocre. That's crazy.
Right. Like this is just who they are. And it's hard to believe that about the Warriors. I know Steph missed a lot of time, which is contributing to their mediocre record. But, if they keep up this 2 timeline thing, it's hard to buy into them as a full-fledged title favorite. I think they are a contender, but not necessarily in the tier with Denver and Memphis. I think those two, deservedly so, belong in the top of the West right now. I love Sacramento. I am so happy for Kings fans that this is finally happening. Their defense, you asked about Denver's defense. I think they can get by. I don't think the Kings can get by, so I don't buy them as a contender, but I do hope they stay in the top 6 so they can at least get this playoff drought over with. New Orleans, we just haven't seen healthy. We just looked this up. Like McCollum, Ingram, Zion have played 10 games together. So they have the potential, certainly. But I want to see them all healthy and playing together before I make any grand proclamations about them. I think the Clippers, Phoenix, and the Warriors, like, I think they all have the ceiling to be legit contenders this year, but whether because of health in Phoenix's case or the Warriors just need to find more bench production beyond Jordan Poole, or the Clippers, Kawhi and Paul George have missed a lot of time, but Kawhi really seems to be rounding into form right now, and they just have so many of these like $10 to $16 million contracts, which a lot of other contenders do not have. So they've traded a bunch of picks. Yeah. So they've traded a bunch of picks for Paul George back in the day. So they're like, I think they can trade 27, 29 swaps and a 28 unprotected first. But if they are hunting for upgrades at the trade deadline, which it does sound like they are, does something like Luke Kennard, Robert Covington, and the 2 swaps in the pick get them in the conversation for Fred VanVleet or someone like that? And is that enough to help move the needle? I'm not willing to rule the Clippers out of the title conversation yet, although they're very much in like prove it to me in April and May. More importantly, like prove that you're going to be healthy in April and May before we're ready to crown you as legitimate title favorites.
Yeah, if I'm being honest about it, I don't like from a Nuggets perspective, I think that the Clippers are a relatively standard matchup for Denver, where Denver has a massive advantage over them mentally at this stage. And Murray just can do whatever he wants against that team. Jokic can do whatever he wants against that team. And they have the size and the athleticism with Gordon and KCP, Porter, even Bruce Brown and Christian Brown, that they can switch and match up with Kawhi and Paul George as well as any team in the West at this point. So I think that's a really interesting factor when handicapping it, because the Clippers could beat pretty much any other team, but I don't think they can beat Denver, which is kind of cool. Grizzlies were still trying to figure out. They're on a 4-game skid after winning 11 in a row, which I just don't believe in their half-court offense. The Warriors, I just think they're mid at this point.
Yeah, right.
They're just kind of very emblematic of what the West is, where you had the bottom pulled out from a couple of teams like the Suns and the Warriors, and suddenly you're left with, okay, who's actually good in this conference now? Luka and the Mavs, they don't have enough. There's just no way that they have enough, I think. I just think that Denver kind of gets this by default, where I think that they have the fewest questions, which they're still 14th in defense. I think you have to be a top 10 defense most of the time, but like you talked about, they don't have to be that this year. They can get to the finals by just outscoring teams and coming up with stops when it matters. They can do that. And I don't think any team can stop Jokic, if we're being honest. So I guess we'll see.
I think they definitely deserve favorite in the West for now. And then we'll see, the next 2 weeks will be very telling. If Clippers or Warriors in particular make a major upgrade, maybe I'd reevaluate that. Or Memphis, especially with Danny Green coming back, that's a big piece in terms of what he brings to the table, assuming he's anything like his former self. But also, that gives them a $10 million expiring to dangle in trades. They haven't made one of these, all in like the Clippers or the Timberwolves. So they still have a bunch of picks to offer, including a Warriors very lightly protected pick in 24. So if they go out and the Raptors start selling and then the Grizzlies somehow wind up with OG Anunoby, then I'm a little more bullish on their chances as well. So
for sure,
Denver, I think, deserves to be the favorite now, but I would like to reserve the right to reevaluate that in roughly 2 to 3 weeks.
Fair enough. I think that's completely fair. Let's take another break. When we come back, we are going to go over this game that is playing on Saturday. What everybody's waiting for at this point, the Nuggets versus the 76ers, the Center Bowl and the MVP Bowl. Should be very fun. We'll be right back. All right, back here, Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here with my good friend Bryan Toporek over at Frobes. So Bryan, what is the most important factor for the 76ers players? How much do they care about this matchup, and how much do fans care about this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's going to be as much bad blood as there was Wednesday. I don't think Jokic is going to get booed every time he touches the ball or anything like that. But I mean, I think there is significant tension between the two. I think it is a very fitting rivals week game. There's certainly some bad blood from Philly's side about, Embiid finishing second to Jokic for the last 2 years in MVP. We talked earlier about, Embiid getting caught up emotionally against Ben Simmons. Would not shock me at all if we see a similar thing here where he's trying to prove that he is the better player than Jokic. And you can't do that during one regular season game anyway. Like, the head-to-head matchup is not going to matter in the MVP race, or at least it shouldn't. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's, if the game plan is let's get Embiid going, let's test Jokic defensively. And in part because I think Denver otherwise has the defensive personnel. I'm curious to see how you think they'd actually match up individually. But I mean, they have the personnel to slow down a Tobias Harris or a James Harden or even a Tyrese Maxey. So I think the Embiid-centric game plan makes sense here. Just, I don't know if posting up Jokic 20 times is necessarily the right play.
Yeah, probably not. Jokic is a good post defender. I can't imagine that even makes that much sense, because if all you're doing is trying to fall away or trying to draw a foul, I think Jokic is pretty good at contesting both of those without doing too much. And if he gets got a couple times, then it is what it is. But I think the Porter situation is tough. I don't know if you've heard on your end, but Porter, his younger brother, Coben, was in a car accident that unfortunately killed the other driver that was a part of that. And so Michael has been away from the team for a while, trying to help his brother out and figure out what's going on there and what the next steps are with that. And just overall, probably not in a great place to play basketball. So we're going to see what that matchup ultimately looks like, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's still out for that game. And Murray's back and Jokic is back, and you'll probably get Murray, KCP, Bruce Brown, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, in which case, if you start Maxey, Harden, and Melton, then Denver actually has a pretty good matchup for all three of those guys, where you probably have KCP on Harden, you probably have Bruce Brown on Tyrese Maxey, and you probably have Murray on Melton. Although Murray, I feel like, is a better matchup in general to defend those guys than either Will Barton or Monte Morris were last year. So going to be interesting to see what that ultimately looks like. And so if Porter is back, then you probably put Porter on Melton, and you have it's tough, because if Porter's back, then you guys probably have Tucker in there, right, as opposed to that. So I wonder if both of these coaches are going to kind of game plan and play chess with the other guy, then the matchup is going to get all screwed up and wonky anyway. So should be pretty interesting to see. What do you think? What stands out about the matchups to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, because this is really the first time, if they do not have Porter, this would be a very logical time to trot out the 3-guard starting lineup, which again, we've seen it close games. We have not seen it start games. So this will be very telling as to whether Doc was telling the truth about actually having 3 starting lineups, or if he was just lying and trying to make the demotion sound less bad to Tyrese Maxey. Because I mean, there wouldn't be a very logical place to put PJ Tucker. If Michael Porter plays, obviously you're putting him on there. Otherwise, I guess you could put him on Aaron Gordon, but I feel like Tobias Harris can do a good enough job. I'm not, I think Gordon's going to get his, but Tobias will be fine in that matchup. Maybe this is just give Tucker a game off. Let him rest his 37-year-old dead hand that he's been nursing for more than a month.
Yeah, honestly, he is. If Tucker has to battle with Aaron Gordon, that's a tough matchup for Tucker physically. That will drain him for the rest of the season with the way that Gordon has been playing. Those guys have, Aaron Gordon last game against Giannis, and he had 26, 14, and 4, and was just battling with Giannis. And he's one of the only guys that can really physically go up against guards and forwards and a big like Giannis. And so I've been really impressed with his season. In general, I think that both of these teams are going to prove unstoppable for the other. it would surprise me if when you're running Harden and Embiid pick and roll, that's probably KCP and Jokic that are guarding that. KCP does a great job of getting over screens and drawing illegal screens. So that's honestly probably one where if you are Philly, watch out for that, because KCP could draw an illegal screening foul or two on Joel Embiid trying to get to that place. But if he doesn't screen well, then Jokic is probably in a good place where he can recover back to Embiid in general. So we're going to see. Like, I think it's ultimately going to end up being a lot of one-on-one between those two guys, especially in the second half of that game, where you are like, it's probably just the easiest way to not involve the rest of the Nuggets, where Gordon is a good helper, KCP is a good helper, Bruce Brown's a good helper. Those guys, like, if you put them into position where they can help, they will, and they'll probably force some Embiid turnovers. So I think that's going to be an interesting one on that end. Do you have any Bones Highland fear after after this last game?
Yeah. This last game against Philly, where he like just single-handedly sunk them in the fourth quarter. Yeah. I think, especially with Tyrese now coming off the bench, or presumably coming off the bench, it could be really fun. It could just be like a Bones versus Tyrese Maxey 6-man duel, and which young explosive guard hits the deepest step back three. Maybe that'll be the thing that decides the game.
That would be awesome. That would be a fun battle in front of the Philly fans on national TV. I know that Nuggets fans are getting ready for this one. This is the only matchup that they really have for rivalry week. And with all of the animosity that's gone on between these two fan bases regarding the last two MVP years, and even before that, when Nuggets fans were like, we think that Nikola Jokic is just as good as Joel Embiid, and Philly fans were like, F you. That's not how this works.
Right. That's just us saying hello. That's how we
they were just saying hello in Philadelphia. That's right. True. No, I think this is going to be a fascinating matchup. I think that both of these teams are really good, and maybe not like elite like you've seen some elite teams in the past, but they're very, very close. I'm curious who wins a finals matchup between these two. This is one where it would be an absolute war, I think.
Yeah. I think Denver would probably be favored. It really depends on what version of PJ Tucker we get, I think. If he is still this, I think Denver probably wins it. I also have much more faith in Mike Malone as a head coach than I do Doc Rivers. So I think I would lean Denver, but obviously I would be rooting for Philly.
Oh, sure. Like, come on now, of course. Like, I think Harden is probably more well suited to carry a second unit than Jamal Murray is. I know that Murray's great, and I think that he works with Jokic in a fantastic way, but that's been a step in his development and his return back. It was one of the things that stood out in the bubble, was that he was really helping carry Denver's offense when Jokic was off the floor. And then when they were both on the floor, it was great, but there was also just a lot of staggering in general where those guys were propping the offense up. I feel like Harden is a little bit better at that right now than Murray is, but this matchup might look completely different when it's like June. That's, good Lord, it's 4 months from now. That's a crazy thing. So I'm very curious to see how it goes. I'd probably think of Denver as the favorite too. It might just come down to home court, if we're being honest. Like, Denver's a tougher place to play for opponents than Denver's had a lot of more success defensively at home than they have on the road so far. And I think that could be a really pertinent thing. I don't know what the home road splits look like for Philly. I know that it previously was bad. I think back in like 2018-19, 2019-20-ish, whenever that year was. I remember that being like, this team is unbeatable at home and defeatable on the road. That was very odd. Denver, it's kind of the same way, where they've just been unstoppable at home when everything's clicking, and on the road they barely get stops at all. So I'd be curious. I think that this would be a fun matchup, and Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic going back and forth. Like, I think that it's a tough era for both of those guys, or like tough era for Embiid specifically, just because Jokic has come away with the award a couple times. He's come away with the first team nomination a couple times here. And if you could have both of them on, you would. If you could give MVP to both of them, you would. Just because it's been that kind of season for both of those guys, especially this year where Embiid is doing some crazy shit and Jokic is averaging a triple-double on 70% true shooting. Like,
right.
Sorry. Like, it's just what Nuggets fans are kind of fed up with it, honestly, just because they just want to celebrate their guy. They're not trying to put down Embiid, but I feel like Sixers fans are so even more fed up with it because of how awesome the dude has been and not really getting anything tangible to show for it.
Yeah, I will say I have a piece ready to go for Forbes. I was hoping like Tim Bontemps released a MVP straw poll in the next couple of days or something to give me a news trigger. But this is one year in particular where I'm just like not here for the MVP snub conversation because there's so many guys like in any other year. I mentioned Tatum earlier. I think Luka as well. Like whoever wins MVP, they're just having a monster season. And there's like a couple. Really, I think Luka, Tatum, Embiid, Jokic, and I even put Giannis in that conversation too. Because if anyone else was doing what Giannis is doing, they would be right there. It's just like we've been spoiled by Giannis, and like we just expect this level of greatness from him. But like, yeah, I mean, Embiid is going to threaten for the league lead in scoring again this season. He's been occasionally more locked in defensively, setting like new efficiency record. But at the same time, like Luka's averaging 33, 9, and 9. Jokic is averaging the triple-double with 25 points and 70% true shooting, as you said, and like leading every advanced metric again. So all of these guys are just having monster seasons. There's not like if Jokic wins, Embiid was not robbed. It's just like he just happened to be, was Charles Barkley robbed of a ring? No, he just played when Michael Jordan played. It just sucks sometimes. That's how it is.
On that note, comparing Nikola Jokic to Michael Jordan, I bid you adieu. This is perfectly timed. Thank you so much for making my point that Jokic is the GOAT in this generation. It's great. Thank you. We don't have to have any other conversation at all. Bryan, thank you so much for hopping on with me. This was really fun. Where can the people find your work? And just make sure to plug whatever you got to plug.
For sure. Thank you for having me. As always, happy to come and talk some trash about Jokic anytime. You can find me on Twitter at btoporek, Toporek. You can find me at Forbes. I write about Sixer stuff and also some salary cap stuff, and then Liberty Ballers of SB Nation Sixer stuff there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hopping on with me, everybody. Good luck to both the Nuggets and the Sixers on Saturday. This should be a very fascinating matchup and hopefully can be revisited in June at some point. Should be a lot of fun. Everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by Superbook Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be brought to you again after that Saturday game. Should be a lot of fun. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll talk to you guys very soon.